My parents smirked. "Your brother earned every penny, you deserve nothing," as they cut me out of their estate. I walked away without a word, but when their fortune disappeared, my answer to their desperate request changed everything. The first time my parents cut me out of the estate, they did it like they were settling a small inconvenience instead of ending a lifetime. My mother slid the papers across the kitchen table with this tight little smile I had seen 100 times whenever she thought she was being practical. My father sat back in his chair and looked pleased with himself, which still makes me angry when I think about it. They had invited me over on a Sunday afternoon, which should have tipped me off, because my family only used Sunday afternoons for two things. Either somebody needed help, or somebody was about to be punished. At that point, I had no idea which one this was. I thought it might be something routine because I had been the one who handled their tax folders, the one who helped them sort bills after my father's surgery, and the one who had spent 3 weekends getting their old paperwork organized after a basement leak. Instead, they had brought in a local estate attorney, updated their trust, and decided my brother should receive everything. Not equal shares. Not a compromise, everything. The lawyer was on speaker while my father nodded like he was approving a roof repair estimate. My brother was not even there in person, which somehow made it worse. He had probably known about it for weeks. My parents explained it the way people explain why one child gets the nicer Christmas gift. My brother had stayed close. My brother had helped more. My brother understood family obligations. My brother had earned every penny. I remember my mother looking at me with that satisfied expression people get when they think they have finally said something final and correct. She told me without raising her voice that I deserved nothing. It was not even dramatic when she said it. That was the part that really got to me. It was casual, as if I was a bill they had chosen not to pay. I looked at the pages, saw my name absent from every relevant line, and realized they had gone through the trouble of making it official. They had not just forgotten me. They had planned it. I asked one question about whether this was really what they wanted. They answered by repeating that my brother had earned everything, and I had already gotten more than enough from them over the years. I did not argue. I did not ask for fairness. I did not remind them of the money I had given them when my father was between jobs. I did not mention the weeks I had spent driving them to appointments when my mother's knee went bad. I did not bring up the basement repairs I had partly paid for, because they could not cover the full amount after the furnace died. I just folded the papers back together, set them down, and left. My mother looked offended that I was not making a scene. My father looked irritated, like I had failed some test I never knew I was taking. I got into my car, sat there for a long time with both hands on the wheel, and felt something in me settle into place. It was not grief. It was not rage. It was the quiet decision that I was done trying to earn a place in a family that had already decided I was temporary. I did not call them that night. I did not call them the next week. I did not send one of those long, emotional texts people send when they are hoping someone will grow a conscience. I went home, put the estate papers in a drawer with the rest of my records, and kept living my life. That turned out to matter more than I could have guessed. I was 34 then, working in operations for a regional logistics company, which is just a polite way of saying I spent my days cleaning up other people's mistakes and making numbers make sense. I was not rich. I was comfortable enough. I had my own apartment, a manageable mortgage after I bought a small place later, and a habit of keeping every document that mattered. I kept receipts. I kept bank statements. I kept emails. I kept screenshots. It had started as a personality trait and turned into a survival skill. My brother, on the other hand, had always survived by being likable in the moment. He was the kind of man who could make a stranger think he was hardworking in the time it took to carry a bag of groceries. He was charming. He was quick with apologies. He could make every failure sound like a misunderstanding. Growing up, that style had worked beautifully on my parents. If I forgot to take the trash out, I was lazy. If he forgot to take the trash out, he had been busy helping somebody. If I got a bad grade, it was a sign I needed to focus more. If he got a bad grade, it meant the teacher had it out for him. If I asked for help with college expenses, I was being demanding. If he needed money to fix a truck or cover rent or start a business, he was getting his life together. I learned early that my role in the family was to be useful and quiet. My brother's role was to be forgiven. For a long time, I thought that was just how families worked. You grow up. You get over it, you get your own life, and the old patterns stop mattering. That was naive. Patterns do not stop, they just get more expensive. About a year before the estate meeting, my father had a health scare that shook everyone. He recovered fine in the end, but during those weeks after the hospital, he was weak, forgetful, and angry about needing help. My mother was overwhelmed and pretending she was not. My brother showed up often enough to look devoted, but I noticed he also used those visits to ask questions. Questions about accounts, questions about passwords, questions about which bills were automatic, questions about whether there was any cash sitting around. I should have paid closer attention then. Instead, I did what I always did. I helped where I could. I organized folders. I set up a shared online bill portal. I made a list of due dates. I scanned insurance documents. I wrote down the names of their attorney, their accountant, and the banker they had used for years. My father was grateful for exactly 2 days. Then he got suspicious of the fact that I was the one keeping things straight and started acting like I was trying to control him. My brother used that mood perfectly. He told them I was being dramatic. He told them I was making a big deal out of paperwork because I like to feel important. He told them he could handle everything himself if they would just trust him. And trust him they did. I did not know at the time how much damage was already underway. I only knew that by the time they called me into the kitchen for the estate meeting, my brother had somehow become the responsible one and I had somehow become the outsider. That should not have surprised me. What surprised me was how pleased they were with themselves. The attorney explained the trust structure in simple terms, probably because he could tell nobody at that table was interested in complexity unless it affected money. Everything would go to my brother. The house, the savings, the investment accounts, the personal property. There were some small exceptions for taxes and final expenses, but the meaning was obvious. I would not be named as beneficiary. I would not be executor. I would not be the backup for anything. I was not even a courtesy mention. My brother nodded along, wearing this expression of solemn maturity that was almost impressive if you did not know him. My mother looked at him like she was proud of a son who had finally become serious. My father looked at me like I had somehow forced their hand by existing in the wrong way. Then came the line about how my brother had earned every penny and I deserved nothing. I remember the exact feeling of that moment because it was so clean. No explosion, no screaming, no crying. Just a hard internal click like a lock turning. I left with my hands steady and my face blank. At home, I put the papers in a folder labeled estate and forgot about them for almost a year. Not because I stopped caring, because I was tired. People like my parents count on exhaustion. They count on the fact that the decent person is usually the one who keeps showing up long after they should have stopped. I decided I would not do that anymore. For a while, life got very quiet. I worked. I cooked too much food for one person because habit is hard to break. I spent more time with friends who had become my real family in all the ways that mattered. I fixed the brakes on my car. I paid off the last chunk of my student loan. I stopped answering family group messages unless they were actually about something I needed to know. My brother sent a few casual texts at first, nothing obvious, just little updates designed to make me feel included. He mentioned my father's blood pressure. He mentioned my mother's garden. He mentioned that the trust was all set and that I should not take it personally because parents sometimes make practical decisions. I did not respond. Then he got irritated and started sending messages that carried the same old family script. He said I was sulking. He said I had always been jealous. He said I should be happy he was taking care of things. I still did not respond. That seemed to annoy him more than arguing would have. Months passed. Then the troubles started showing up in pieces. At first it was little things. My mother called once to ask if I knew why the electric bill had doubled. I said I did not. She sounded embarrassed when she admitted my brother was handling the finances now. A few weeks later, my father's truck was suddenly for sale, which made no sense because he had loved that thing like a family member. My brother said they were downsizing. My mother said it was temporary. Neither of them sounded convinced. Then my cousin mentioned at a birthday dinner that my brother had started talking about a business opportunity. That was the first real clue. He had always wanted to be seen as an entrepreneur. In school, he had floated through everything with charm and half-finished plans. As an adult, he jumped from idea to idea. He had sold used cars for a while, then flipped furniture, then started a side business installing flooring, then claimed he was about to do something big in the contracting world. According to family gossip, this latest venture involved commercial equipment, a partner he had met through church, and a lot of borrowed money. I did not think much of it at first. People in our family loved to talk about business plans. They barely understood. But then my mother stopped answering my calls for a couple weeks. That was unusual enough that I drove over one evening after work. The yard looked rough. The front porch light was out. My brother's truck was gone. Inside, my parents were tense and tired in that specific way people get when bills are due and pride is getting in the way. My mother said everything was fine. My father said I did not need to worry. My brother was supposedly out of town for business. I noticed a stack of unopened envelopes on the counter. I also noticed a final notice from a lender I did not recognize. No one offered an explanation. I did not push. I had already learned that pressure made them defensive and defensive made them dishonest. Instead, I asked if they needed anything from the grocery store. My mother said no in a voice that meant yes. I bought them milk, bread, coffee, and a few things my father liked to snack on while pretending he was not eating because he was worried. When I came back with the bags, I saw a folder half hidden under the microwave. It contained what looked like bank statements. My mother moved fast enough to cover it up, which told me more than any explanation could have. I left a little later than I planned, and on the drive home I had that uncomfortable feeling that usually means a family story is larger than anyone is admitting. By then I had also started getting indirect information from relatives who had not been cut out of the family drama. Aunt Denise said my brother had been spending more time at the local bank than anyone should need to. A cousin mentioned that my parents had talked about refinancing the house. A family friend said there had been a scare involving my father and a missed payment on something connected to insurance. None of it fit together yet. It just felt wrong. Then my mother called one evening and asked me to stop by the bank with her the next day. She said it was a simple paperwork issue and that she needed someone calm there. That should have been the moment I brought everything I had ever saved and demanded answers. Instead, I said yes because I still had a reflex for helping. The local bank was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody and every problem could be discussed under fluorescent lights with a plastic pen chained to the counter. My mother was already there when I arrived, sitting too straight in one of the chairs, hands folded, expression brittle. My brother showed up 10 minutes later with his usual confident walk and a smile that disappeared the second he saw me. That was the moment I knew he was nervous. He tried to hide it by acting annoyed. The banker started going through the paperwork and my stomach tightened almost immediately. There was a home equity line I had never heard of. There were new automatic withdrawals. There was a balance on a credit card I knew my parents had paid off years earlier. There was also a recent transfer that made no sense at all. My father had not been with us because he was at a medical appointment, which my brother used as an excuse for everything. I asked to see the source documents. That request changed the whole room. My brother said it was unnecessary. My mother said we did not need to make a scene. The banker, to his credit, did not care about family dynamics. He cared about signatures. He pointed out that the application had been filed online and that someone had authorized access through a set of credentials my parents supposedly used. My mother looked genuinely confused. My brother looked like a man trying to calculate how much damage he could still prevent. I asked for copies. I got them eventually because the banker could see I was the only person there who actually wanted to understand what was happening. That night I sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours comparing signatures and dates. I am not a handwriting expert, but I do know my father's writing well enough to recognize when it looked rushed, shaky, or flat-out wrong. The line that really got me was a notarization on a form that should have required both parents in person. The date did not line up with any day they had both been out of the house. The notary stamp was from a mobile service I had never seen before. I started digging. First, I went to the county records website and pulled anything I could find on the deed. Then I requested older documents through the clerk's office. Then I searched my own files for the scans I had made during the previous year when I was helping with the bills. By midnight, I had a rough picture. By 2 in the morning, I had something much worse. My brother had not just been borrowing money. He had been moving money. He had pulled cash from a retirement account. He had increased the debt on the house. He had changed the beneficiary designation on a small life insurance policy. He had also added his own LLC to one of the property documents in a way that made my skin crawl. It was not yet obvious whether he had forged anything outright or simply manipulated my parents into signing bad paperwork while they were confused and overwhelmed. Either way, the result was the same. Their fortune was being eaten from the inside. The next few weeks became a strange balance of acting normal and building a record. I did not tell my parents everything right away because I needed to verify it first. That is one thing I learned years ago when dealing with messy people. You do not accuse until you can prove. You do not reveal the entire hand when you only need one card to keep the game from being rigged. I called the bank's fraud department. I called the county recorder. I made an appointment with a local elder law attorney. After my own search showed enough red flags to make me uncomfortable. I also quietly began documenting every conversation I had with my parents, every bill they mentioned, and every new inconsistency. It sounds obsessive when I write it out. Maybe it was, but the alternative was pretending not to see the sinking ship because the people steering it had once told me to trust them. The elder law attorney was the first person who listened without trying to make it emotional. He looked at the copies, asked a few blunt questions, and then told me to expect this to get ugly if I kept digging. He also told me something that I wish more people understood. A lot of family financial abuse does not start with cartoon villain behavior. It starts with one person becoming the default helper. Then the helper becomes the gatekeeper. Then nobody else is allowed to question the process because doing so would seem disloyal. By the time anyone realizes what happened, the money is gone, and everyone is too ashamed to admit how long they let it continue. That explanation fit my brother too well. When I got home, I spent half the night looking at old emails and text logs from the period when I had been helping my parents with the paperwork. I found a few things I had not paid enough attention to then. One was a message thread where my brother kept pushing for access to a specific retirement account because he said it would simplify tax season. Another was an email from my mother asking me not to mention some of the paperwork to my father because he was stressed and it would upset him. There was also a spreadsheet I had made for them that my brother later copied and changed without telling me. He had deleted notes about which bills were on auto pay and which ones were manual. That probably seemed harmless to him. In reality, it made it easier to hide missed payments. I began to understand that the fortune had not disappeared all at once. It had leaked. Then it had been drained. Then the alarms had been ignored. A few days later, my mother called again, this time sounding worn down and frightened. She said my father had received a notice about a delinquent property tax payment and that she did not understand why there was a lien reference on the house. I asked if my brother was there. She said he was too busy to come by. That answer told me more than the notice itself. I drove over that afternoon and asked to see every piece of mail they had not opened. There were at least 2 months of statements sitting in a basket by the refrigerator. There was a utility shut-off warning, a bank letter, a tax reminder, and a notice from an insurance company about a missing premium. My father looked embarrassed and angry at the same time. My mother looked tired enough to cry. My brother was supposed to be handling everything. Instead, he had apparently been using them as cover while he rearranged the furniture of their finances. I left with a stack of copies and a promise to call the attorney. That night, the attorney confirmed what I was already suspecting. There were enough irregularities to justify a deeper review. He suggested a forensic accountant, a formal fraud complaint with the bank, and a possible adult protective services referral if my parents were no longer fully able to understand what they had signed. That part mattered. My father had started showing signs of confusion. Not full dementia, not at that stage, but enough that a good lawyer would take it seriously. My brother had clearly taken advantage of that. It was one of those moments where you realize the family story in your head has been too generous for too long. I had been telling myself my parents were simply choosing him. The truth was probably worse. They were being managed. I spent the next week getting everything in order. I made a timeline. I labeled every document. I wrote down dates, amounts, account numbers, and who had been present for what. I am not naturally confrontational, but I do know how to prepare a case when one falls into my lap. By then, the family atmosphere had started to crack. My brother was calling more often. He was polite in a strained way that did not fool me. He told me the bank was being difficult and that there might have been clerical confusion. He also said the house was under pressure and that he needed everyone to stay calm. That was the only time I almost laughed out loud while he was talking. Calm had never been the family's problem. Honesty had. Then he made the mistake of asking if I would come by the house with a notary form he wanted my parents to sign. He said it was just to fix a small issue. I asked what issue. He did not answer directly. He shifted into the old family trick of acting offended that I had asked a practical question. I told him I would not be signing anything until I saw it. That was the first time he sounded genuinely angry, not because he had been challenged, because he had been slowed down. When I got to the house that evening, I found him in the kitchen with a folder, 2 envelopes, and my parents looking miserable. The atmosphere was thick enough to cut. My father was already irritated before I even sat down. My mother was trying to keep the peace. My brother launched into an explanation about some temporary financing problem and a refinance that would keep the house stable. He framed it like a routine fix. He wanted my parents to agree to it quickly. He wanted me to stop asking questions. He needed a signature. I asked for the actual loan packet. He handed it over with obvious reluctance. The numbers were worse than I had expected. There were fees stacked on fees. There was a prepayment penalty. There was a clause that would have given the lender a much stronger claim if the payments were missed. It was basically the kind of thing that helps a desperate person today and ruins them tomorrow. I looked at the agreement, then at the timeline I had built, then at the mess of unopened mail on the counter. My brother kept insisting it was the only way to keep everything from collapsing. I asked how much money had already been moved. He tried not to answer. My father, for the first time, asked a direct question of his own. He wanted to know where the retirement money had gone. My brother said it was temporary and business-related. That was not an answer. It was a dodge. I watched my father's face change as he realized he was hearing the same vague language I had heard for weeks. He suddenly looked older. That was the moment I felt less anger and more pity, which I hated because pity is an awful thing to feel for someone who has spent years treating you like a spare part. My mother kept telling everyone to calm down. I did not raise my voice. I just said I was not signing anything. My brother asked whether I wanted the house to be foreclosed on. I told him the house was already at risk because of his decisions. He accused me of making assumptions. I told him I had the bank statements. That was enough to drain the color from his face. My mother started crying then, not because anyone had shouted, but because truth has a way of making panic visible. I did not enjoy that moment. I am saying that because people like to assume the person who is right feels victorious. Usually the opposite is true. The person who is right just has to stand there while everything falls apart. I left with copies of the loan paperwork, and the next morning I sent everything to the attorney and the bank fraud unit. Within days, the bank put a hold on part of the account activity while they reviewed the signatures and the authorization trail. The forensic accountant found transfers that lined up suspiciously with my brother's personal debt. There were restaurant charges, an expensive SUV down payment, hardware store expenses that made no sense, and a series of cash withdrawals that looked an awful lot like someone trying to make records messy on purpose. There was also a payment to a contractor that turned out to be my brother's friend. The contractor had never actually done the work listed on the invoice. It was all much smaller and dumber than I expected, which is usually how fraud looks when you finally strip away the family drama. No grand master plan, just a bunch of selfish choices stacked on top of each other until they became a collapse. My parents were not innocent in the broader sense. They had ignored warning signs because it was easier than dealing with conflict. They had trusted the child who made them feel good. They had dismissed the child who made them think. That part stung for me because it was so familiar. But there is a difference between being careless and being criminal. My brother had crossed that line. The county records confirmed that one of the property documents had been amended in a way that was extremely questionable. The notary information did not match the date my parents claimed they had signed. The attorney told me that whether it became a criminal matter would depend on what the bank and the district attorney were willing to do with the evidence. At that point, I was no longer interested in revenge. I just wanted the paper trail to be complete. And then my brother made another mistake. He decided I was the obstacle. He started pressing my parents to get me out of the way by claiming I was trying to take control of the family assets. This was almost funny in how predictable it was. The man who had spent weeks moving money around was accusing me of wanting money. He never understands the irony. My parents, who had once smirked at me like I was worthless, suddenly found themselves in a position where my paperwork mattered more than his personality. The bank wanted explanations. The attorney wanted copies. The county wanted clarification. The insurance company wanted the missing premium history. The tax office wanted payment confirmation. My brother could charm a dinner table. He could not charm a ledger. It was around then that my parents made the desperate request that changed everything. They asked me to come over one more time, just me, because they needed help figuring out whether they could keep the house. By then the fortune had mostly evaporated. A mix of withdrawals, debt, penalties, missed payments, and one disastrous business partnership had eaten through what used to look substantial on paper. There was still some value in the house, some retirement money left, and a few liquid accounts, but nothing like what they had thought they had. They were shocked by how fast it had gone. I was not. I had watched the leak for months. They asked me, indirectly at first and then more plainly, to help them clean it up. They wanted me to call the bank and smooth things over. They wanted me to consider signing a short-term arrangement so the house would not be taken. They wanted me to help because my brother had become difficult to reach, and because, in the end, I was the only one in the family who still had his head on straight. That was the part that almost made me laugh in a bitter way. The only one they had cut out. The only one they had told deserved nothing. The only one who still knew where the bodies in the paperwork were buried. I sat at their kitchen table while my mother avoided my eyes and my father stared at the floor. I thought about how easy it would be to make the moment uglier than it needed to be. I could have reminded them of everything. I could have told them they had made their bed. I could have said they should call the son who had earned every penny. Instead, I told them the truth. I said I was not going to sign a loan I had not approved. I said I would not put my name on any rescue plan that protected the brother who caused the mess. I said I would help gather documents, speak to the attorney, and make sure the bank received everything it needed. I also said I would not take on new debt, co-sign anything, or sacrifice my own financial stability to clean up a disaster they had ignored. That answer hit them harder than yelling would have. My mother looked stunned. My father got angry for a minute, which he often did when faced with reality. He tried the old guilt tactic, making it sound like I was abandoning the family at the worst time. I told him the family had abandoned me first in writing with an estate plan. He had no answer for that. My mother asked whether I was seriously going to let them lose the house. I told her I was seriously trying to keep them from losing everything else to a bad loan on top of a bad situation. That was the closest I got to offering comfort. I did not offer false hope. I did not promise rescue. I told them that if they wanted my help, it would be the kind that involved facts, documents, and honesty. Not magical thinking, not loyalty tests, not another signature. That was my answer, and it changed everything because it took away the last cover my brother had. Without me willing to play along, there was no clean family narrative left to hide behind. The attorney filed for a temporary financial review. The bank froze further questionable activity. A neutral fiduciary was brought in to sort the accounts. My brother, for the first time in his life, could not bluff his way through a situation with moving words and a good smile. The evidence was too thick. The missed payments, the transfers, the signature inconsistencies, and the personal spending all sat there in black and white. My brother tried to blame the business partner. Then he tried to blame my father's memory. Then he tried to blame me for allegedly stirring up the bank. None of it held up. One of the more surreal moments came when the bank investigator asked me how long I had been keeping records. I told him long enough to know who had been moving money, and when the pressure started, he actually thanked me, which felt strange because I was not trying to be heroic. I was just doing the thing I had always done, except now it happened to matter. The immediate fallout was ugly. My brother vanished for almost 2 weeks. Then he resurfaced with a defensive, exhausted look and a story about stress, misunderstandings, and temporary borrowing. Nobody believed him anymore. He had spent too much time using the word temporary on money that had clearly not been temporary. The bank sent some of the account history to law enforcement after the fraud review flagged enough problems. The district attorney did not promise a felony charge, but the threat of one was enough to make my brother talk more carefully. He became the kind of man who suddenly remembered every legal phrase he had ever heard. It did not help. Meanwhile, my parents were forced to confront what they had done to me years earlier. That was not the main point of the investigation, but it happened anyway. When the attorney asked for the full family history, the estate documents came up. So did my exclusion. So did the fact that I had been the one to organize their finances before my brother took over. The attorney noted that I had repeatedly helped without compensation. I did not make that case emotionally. I simply provided the records, bills I had paid, gas receipts from the hospital drives, a copy of the basement repair invoice showing my contribution, old emails where they had asked me to keep everything straight. The attorney later told me that those records would matter for any reimbursement claim I chose to file. I had not thought about that part until then. I was too busy stopping the bleeding. The house survived foreclosure, but only because the lender agreed to a temporary hold while the estate issues were sorted and the neutral fiduciary sold off some assets. My parents had to downsize. There was no way around that. The fortune they had smirked about was not gone in some dramatic, cinematic way. It had been converted into debt, penalties, and bad decisions. That was almost more insulting than a wild scandal would have been. Their money had not been stolen by a master criminal. It had been eaten by family entitlement and tolerated too long. My mother took that harder than my father. She cried the first time she saw the account summary because she had genuinely believed they were still secure. My father got quieter. He stopped pretending my brother had only made harmless mistakes. He still defended him at first, because parents do that when their favorite child is exposed. But even he eventually ran out of excuses. The family reaction split in a way I should have seen coming. Some relatives quietly admitted they had always suspected my brother was a mess. Some acted like I should be grateful my parents had ever planned to leave me anything at all. A few people, including my Aunt Denise, said they were shocked by how calmly I had handled it. That word calmly came up a lot. It apparently mattered that I had not turned the whole thing into a public war. I do not know how to explain this to people who think being mature is the same as being soft. Staying calm did not mean I was okay. It meant I had enough control left not to ruin my own position while the truth was unfolding. That was the advantage, not revenge, not luck. Control. My brother eventually agreed to a repayment plan tied to the recovered assets and whatever remained of his business account. I do not know how much money will ever actually come back from that side of things. Probably not enough. The bank recovered some. The sale of the house recovered some. The rest may never be seen again. There was a civil claim over the questioned transfers, and while that part moved slowly, it at least kept my brother from pretending everything was resolved. I also filed my own reimbursement claim through the estate process for the money I had documented giving them over the years. I did not ask for anything that was not already in writing. That was important to me. I did not want them to hand me some sentimental apology and call it balance. I wanted the record to reflect reality. The claim was not huge compared to what had been lost, but it was enough to matter. It covered money I had fronted for repairs, some hospital-related expenses, and a few other things I had paid because the family kept treating me like the responsible son when it was useful and the irrelevant son when it was not. That check was one of the most satisfying pieces of paper I have ever received. Not because it made me rich, because it proved I had not imagined the pattern. A few months after the financial review started, my father had to move into a smaller place with my mother because the old house was no longer practical. There was no triumphant last stand. Just packing boxes, decisions about furniture, and the silent embarrassment of losing square footage to a bad series of choices. I helped with the move in the way I had offered from the beginning. I labeled boxes. I coordinated a truck. I made sure the important documents were not left in a kitchen drawer. I did not move into the role of family savior. I moved into the role of competent person in the room. That was enough. My brother tried to re-enter the picture after things stabilized. He sent a few messages that were half apology, half self-defense. He said he had not meant for things to get so far. He said he was under pressure. He said he had hoped to protect everyone. That was when I realized he still did not understand why he lost. It was not because the money disappeared. Families survive money problems all the time. He lost because he treated truth like a negotiable inconvenience. He thought enough charm could keep people from noticing what was missing. It could not. The final collapse of his standing did not come from one big dramatic reveal. It came from all the receipts, all the notices, all the dates that did not match, all the signatures that looked wrong, all the times he thought he had bought more time. By the end, my parents were no longer smirking. They were exhausted. My mother apologized to me in a way that was real but awkward. My father took longer. He's the kind of man who would rather chew glass than admit he was wrong out loud. But he eventually acknowledged that he had let my brother play the family because it was easier than facing conflict. He never said I deserved nothing again. That alone felt like a minor miracle. I do not pretend everything got magically better after that. It did not. There are still family dinners that feel too careful. There are still moments when my mother looks at me like she wants to say more, but does not know where to start. There are still relatives who think I should have stepped in sooner, as if being treated like an afterthought means I also have to be a mind reader. And there is still the fact that my brother will always be my brother. That does not disappear because the bank file gets thick. But my life is better now in a way that is hard to explain to people who have never had to choose between peace and loyalty. I learned that calm is not weakness. I learned that keeping records is not being obsessive when the people around you keep rewriting reality. I learned that you do not fix family by making yourself smaller. I learned that if somebody wants to cut you out while taking your help, they usually expect you to stay useful in the background forever. I stopped agreeing to that. The wild part is that I do not even think my parents understand how close they came to losing everything that actually mattered. Not just the money, not just the house. Their credibility. Their ability to be taken seriously by banks, attorneys, and their own children. Once that goes, it is hard to get back. I think they know it now. I know they know it because they do not talk about the estate anymore. They talk about budgets. They talk about downsizing. They talk about keeping every notice in one folder. They even ask me to help them sort mail sometimes, which would have been insulting in another timeline, but now feels like a realistic attempt at repair. I help when I can, not because I forgive everything, because I know the difference between helping and being used now. That difference changed my life. The most satisfying part was not watching my brother panic when the bank started asking questions. It was not seeing the old family hierarchy crack under paperwork. It was not even getting my reimbursement claim honored. It was the fact that when they came to me desperate, after smirking and telling me I deserved nothing, I did not beg for a place at their table. I offered the truth. I offered the documents. I offered the one kind of help that did not destroy me. And because I had spent years preparing, because I had kept records when they thought I was being fussy, because I had walked away instead of fighting for scraps, the truth finally had enough weight to stand on its own. That is what changed everything. Not anger, not revenge, not luck. Paper, patience, and the simple fact that lies do not hold up forever once somebody decides to keep the receipts.